This is a Mottler brush. It's a larger brush, 1.5 inches long. And the first thing I do is I always dip my brush in water because it helps me to see how stiff the brush is, how springy it is, how it bends, and overall how I can work it. So you want to take advantage of the shape of a brush, so how it folds and so on. So basically I will be using the top of it as my liner in a way, and the angle, the side of it, as a smaller brush. So the first thing you can do with this brush is basically wet every single painting whenever you paint wet on wet. I wetted that area, and now what I'm doing is by that side of that brush, I'm painting sky. So I'm going to shape some of the clouds, and the clouds are going to be the areas that I leave alone. So whatever you see the blue, that's obviously the sky, and then whatever stays white are going to be our clouds. But if you take a look at how I am using this brush, it's mostly by the angle of it. And by the angle of it, I am shaping my clouds, I'm painting the clouds, but also using that side of a brush to create that line. Now I just want to mix in some of the pink color into my blue just to create a more natural look of the sky. So the sky has a little bit of that purple in it. But I continue just kind of flipping this brush from one side to the other because it's also about like where do I have that paint. So I'm observing my brush too, and it's by a feeling like what side has that color or more of that color. And you do want your brush to be wet, the entire brush, when you paint. And the side, that corner of that brush, helps me to control how far do I go, so I don't go over that line. So that's the point that I need to focus on. This side is what guides me through. So now I'm grabbing some of that paint, and the paint is spread over majority of this brush. So in my mind, I am painting with the whole brush, even when the angle of it is going to kind of help me shape that sand so where it ends. Now I am going to paint some of that sea area, but I have to make sure that the sky is dry. First, I am going to create some of that sea foam. And again, I'm using that corner of the brush, and this is dry brushing. And it's just a matter of how you're handling it, how you're twisting that brush. And when you focus on one side of it, it can be like one brush, like a round brush almost. And then when you're painting overall, it's much easier and you're achieving nice and random strokes. Right now, I'm going to paint next to that sky area, and I am mixing some of the sea colors. I'm going to place those darker colors right under basically the sky, but I'm going over the sky area, which is in the first place why I went over my initial line with those blue sky colors over, because I knew I would be painting over with that sea color. So with that corner of that brush, I am able to create a nice and straight line. You do want to be careful here and take your time. It is a larger brush, so you want to get used to it for sure first, but it does create a nice line. It's just a matter of holding it correctly. So it's a nice handle. It's not too big, so it's really easy to hold it. And then I'm adding a little more paint, but it's more diluted with water. And using that flatter part of the brush. So the brush has to be really flat, and that's why you want to wet it, but you want to remove excess of that water by using your towel. So you want to do that so you don't bring too much water onto your paper, because then you kind of lose control. And now I'm kind of shaping my sea with different colors. The lighter colors are closer to the sand area, and then all the darker colors are in the back. I can use that flatness of that brush, that shape of it, to again create a nice and straight line, but also lines on the water. And when I'm painting it wet on wet, everything disperses so nicely, so it's going to be nice and smooth. So I am using basically the flatness of this brush to paint all these lines, and it's a very delicate stroke, so I don't go hard on the paper. I go very lightly. So I'm taking advantage of how it's shaped, but I also want to make sure this brush is like flat when I grab that paint, so I can create those nice even lines and straight lines on the water. And also so I have a nice line right under that sky area. and then a little more darker tones over the water. And now I have to flatten my brush just to make sure it's nice and straight, that line. So it's like my liner brush, so I can create those nice straight lines and going over the wet area. And now by the angle of that brush, I'm painting smaller lines and then dipping my brush in water again and going with that wet brush above it. So that's why it's important to have this brush, in this case flat, and so you have that nice line. And of course you want the entire brush to be wet when you do this. You don't want to just have this brush partially wet, but it's a really easy to handle brush. Thank you so much, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.